Joining me now is Liberal MP Tim Wilson. Tim, good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us. Before we get to more local issues, just on that point, I thought, what do you think of the British election this week and Boris Johnson's plan to use immigration policy, I suppose, and borrow from ours?
Well, I think there's a lot of strength to our immigration system, but it's not perfect either. So I think there's lessons to be learned around how to manage the number of people coming in, making sure you get the right workforce of people and creating opportunities. But critically, what you want is people making a long-term investment in the future of our country, because that's the base on which people integrate, become full participants, raise families and contribute to the future of the country. So I think they need to be mindful of those concerns as well.
All right, just a couple of issues in our papers this morning, notably power prices over the next 3 years. They are scheduled to be heading down. I believe Queensland is the biggest winner so far, dropping in excess of 7%. Down to 2% in South Australia. What are your thoughts on those drops and how far do you expect them to go?
Well, this is in part response to what the federal government has been doing by trying to remove the benefits that power companies are getting by having huge vertical integration. Of course, in Queensland, they basically still have monopolies, government monopolies around power generation. But it also comes as a direct consequence of just simply having more supply in the grid. And that's been the focus of this government at every point, to stabilise the investment environment, to make sure that people can put money on the table so they can invest in the future of energy markets in Australia. The more supply, the lower the prices and the better outcome for consumers.
Do you have an idea of how much further it can go? I mean, I was reading that people can be saving in excess of $100 a year.
Yep. Well, there's that, but there's different parts. There's, if you want to go through the complex structure of energy prices between wholesale prices, network charges, etc., etc. The main thing is to make sure that there's good competition in the wholesale market and then at the retail market, because they're the ones that can reduce the cost over the time frame. But we're going through an energy transition. We've gone from highly centralised, particularly coal-based and gas-based energy generation, to a mixture and decentralised model where, of course, you've got people with solar PV cells, you've got hydro, you've got gas during peak periods, you've also got the continuation of coal and the potential for new types of energy generation. So half the task is managing the balance so that everybody gets the energy they want when they need it and a price they can afford. That's why we've focused on reliability, affordability, but also getting our emissions down.
And the opposition leader, Anthony Albanese, he's heading to Queensland for another listening tour. He's now given some comments to 9 newspapers this morning suggesting that coal, well, it's here to stay. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think Labor Party's just got a wake-up call to reality. They got absolutely poleaxed in central Queensland because they ran around saying one thing in one part of the country about how they hate coal, and they went up to other parts of Queensland and said how they supported the workers and their jobs. You saw only the other day Labor MPs saying, well, it's all fine to say get rid of those jobs where people earn 120 grand a year, but the alternative you're making to people is that they should have jobs that are only worth 40 grand a year. This is part of the challenge we need to lead as part of as a country to transition the economy through lots of different stages, including a lower emissions profile, but it's not going to be done by simply leaving workers behind. And that's Labor's plan at every point to date, which is to cut emissions and leave Australians behind. Our plan has been focused on cutting emissions, but taking Australians with us and not leaving Australians behind.
Tim, on the front page of the Australian Financial Review today, there have been some comments that have been provided by Kenneth Hayne. He's taken a big swipe at the Morrison government for its, quote, unambitious emissions reductions policy. How much weight does that have?
To me, none. The reality is the Australian government does have an ambitious target to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions in line with our commitments internationally, and that's the platform that we took to the election. There were other platforms that were taken to an election, so if you want to discredit or democracy and pay little attention to that, then you can follow his course of action, or you can actually take the public with you. You can leave no Australians behind, and that's the focus of the Morrison government. I mean, the idea that you cut the pathway to cutting emissions is also to cut jobs is frankly madness.
He also says that, and I'm quoting here, climate change needs to be included in corporate strategies, and has even raised the risk of boards who fail to act could end up in court. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, companies, the ones that I talk to, including those that appear before the Economics Committee, are absolutely factoring in risk profiles associated with climactic behaviour, and that includes, temporary weather events all the way through to long-term trends. You get insurance companies or banks, and they're talking all about these risks, and they take on, sovereign risk components as well around what government does. So I think companies are doing that, and I think it's actually a bit of a red herring to go around saying if they're not factoring in. All I see is evidence of people doing it and making sure that it's appropriate as part of their risk profile.
Okay, just finally, there's been some stats that have been provided by the Australian National University. It's done its own election study, basically. Some of the results reveal Scott Morrison the most popular leader since Kevin Rudd back in 2007. Bill Shorten the least popular leader of any major political party since 1990. Your thoughts on those?
Well, I'm not going to kick Bill Shorten when he's down, but that's obviously difficult, no doubt, for him to read. And I'm not surprised the Prime Minister has clear popularity, because in the end he's strong and principled and leading a united team in government. I think we shouldn't put too much weight on it. Kevin Rudd, as you said, was I read the data in the newspaper this morning, and he had an approval of something like 6 out of 10, but it fell apart very quickly because all of his lofty ambition of what he could talk about and what he promised the public was never matched in reality and never matched with conviction, so it fell away very quickly. That's why you want people who are strong, who are principled and are focused on delivering for the Australian people. But if you're in this game for popularity, frankly, you're wasting your time. At best, I think if you leave politics having the public respect what you've achieved, then you have done the best you can do.
All right, Tim Wilson, I appreciate your time this morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.